I'm Austinlugo.
I'm Andrew Harp.
This is With Nothing to Say.
Let's talk about Tampopo.
Before we get started today, just a quick shout out to our friends at the Living for Cinema podcast. Head on over to the Living for the Cinema podcast for many pod reviews, the good, the bad, and the ugly for all different genres and decades, including the best needle drops, wasted talent, trailer moments, and MVP of each movie. This week, we're talking about Tampopo, which is a movie neither of us had seen. You kind of suggested we're kind of going back and forth on what kind of movie we want to pick. You picked this one. I know this month you didn't want to do any sort of theme, but it is interesting that in the month of November, coming out just before Thanksgiving, you did pick a movie about food.
It's a food movie. I thought about that today too. I was like, I picked a food movie for the month of November.
I think I'm going to pick a food movie too, just to keep it on this.
Okay. I'm cool with that. I love food movies.
I don't know if I've seen that many. I don't know. Ratatouille. I've seen that one.
That's a pretty good one. I'm sure I would have to see and think about it, but I'm sure there's a couple I've seen.
Yeah, I have a good one for next week. We'll get into that later. But Tampopo is a movie about food, as we kind of said earlier. It's a movie about food. It's a movie about ramen. It's these two truck drivers driving around, and they meet this woman. And the whole movie is a series of vignettes kind of intermixed with a larger plot, which is the larger plot is that they're fixing this noodle shop to be the best ramen shop in, I don't know, whatever area they're at.
That's right. It's a comedy film. It's a Japanese film, 1985, directed by Juzo Itami. I've never seen any Juzo Itami movies. All his movies are in Criterion. Like we talked about, it's a food Japanese comedy movie. Well, the movie starts with kind of a bit. It starts with a Yakuza boss played by an actor I like a lot, Koji Yakusho. He's a really good actor. He's in a movie called a really good J-horror film called Cure. He plays the protagonist in that movie. He's very good. And in this movie, it's like one of his first film roles. It's not a big role, but he plays like a man in a white suit, women in a white dress. He's like a Yakuza mob boss, I think.
Yeah.
And they go to a movie theater, and it's really funny. They sit right in the front row, and these servants, like 20, like not 20, but like 5 of them, like set up like this table with all this food. And he starts like addressing the audience. So he gets up and he's like, hey, you're watching the movies. We're about to see the movies too. He's like addressing, breaking the fourth wall. He's like, what are you eating? And he's like, I hate when people eat during the movies with their like chips and the crinkly wrappers. And then like someone starts eating chips over to the side, and he goes over and he freaks out and he hits them and stuff. And yeah, it just starts off with this like kind of like funny little thing where it's kind of setting up the tone of the movie, the kind of comedic vignette thing that they're kind of doing throughout. And it's pretty funny. And then from there, it kind of goes into the actual narrative of the movie. But I like the beginning. It's really fun.
Yeah, the opening's great. When I was first watching this movie, I was trying to figure out because it felt very familiar, even though I too had not seen any of this director's films before, but the style of comedy, the type of film felt very familiar. And it took me a while to kind of figure out what was familiar about it. And, my first thought was kind of like, oh, it kind of has like a little bit of a like Wes Anderson kind of quirk to it, but it's not really that. It kind of has some like Monty Python stuff.
Monty Python is what I thought.
It certainly does have like those kind of quirks to it. But I think the director or filmmaker or writer that it most resembles, at least to me, is Luis Buñuel, who is this absurdist filmmaker, and his later work is pretty funny. His early work's pretty dark, but it has this certain absurdicism to it that doesn't just it kind of accepts that the world itself is absurd and that the movie is like a representation of the world more than it isn't. So even though like it is absurd and weird and like doesn't make any sense, Luis Buñuel's films are kind of like, hey, the world doesn't make any sense either, so why should I make films? Kind of similar to David Lynch, but maybe not as dark, I guess. I mean, it's obviously this film's like pretty funny and lighthearted in a lot of ways. Not that it doesn't have its moments of kind of, touchingness. Although I will say one of my biggest complaints of this film, although, I enjoyed this film a lot, I think my biggest complaint is there's not a lot to hold on to in the sense of, I don't know, I guess it's so lighthearted and silly that sometimes for me it's kind of hard to hold on to these characters, to like care a lot about these characters. I mean, I do care about them, but like, at the end of the day, it does just kind of feel like a movie, if that makes sense.
That's why it's great. I love movies. That's why the beginning is great, because Juzo Itami, he loves movies, he loves food, and it's kind of like about the thing. And we'll get into kind of like how the movie kind of is, you know what I mean? Like, the movie's kind of weird because it is a Japanese film. There are Japanese actors in the movie, but it doesn't like look or feel particularly Japanese. It's very like Western inspired, whether it be like you said, Buñuel, or like Monty Python, or Western movies like Howard Hawks or anything, or some stuff like that. It's very interesting. It's kind of like this like kind of a mix of a bunch of different things. The culture that's focused on a lot, of course, is Japanese food culture, but we'll get into that. But like I said, we start with a narrative, which is, of course, two truckers. They're driving. Goro and Gun. Gun, of course, is played by Ken Watanabe, who of course, is now a very, very famous actor. And Goro, of course, is played by, I don't think I've seen him in any movies, but he's in a lot of famous movies. Tsutomu Yamazaki. He's basically the protagonist, Goro. And they're driving, and Gun is reading like a book about ramen, which is fun. And it kind of cuts to him like imagining sitting next to the writer, and like kind of talking about how like ramen is like kind of like a sacred experience and one that should be like dealt with like reverence. And they're both like reading the book and stuff, and Goro's like, I'm hungry. Let's stop at this ramen shop. And that's where they meet Tampopo.
Yes. They stop at this ramen shop. It's the middle of the night. It's raining. It's dark. And I love as they walk out of their truck, there's just like this kid just like being beat up. Like just like,
oh yeah.
You're someone almost little kid. They're like 8-9-year-old kids. They're little kids. And they're just like curb stomping. And Guru goes over. I think it's Guru that goes over. And then he like breaks them up. He's like, hey, don't do that. And then the kid runs into the noodle shop, the ramen shop. And then they run in after, or they follow him into this ramen shop. And that is where they meet Tampopo.
Yeah, which is like dandelion in Japanese. And they go there and they're hanging out and they're like, okay, we want some ramen and stuff. And they are ordering ramen, and they soon realize that like, it's not a very like good ramen shop. Like they're like looking at her technique and the way she's preparing it, and it doesn't seem to be going very well.
I love how much they know about ramen. They're just like experts at ramen.
Because they eat it all the time, because they're like common working class dudes. So they eat a lot of ramen, it's a commoner's dish, you might say. So they're like, they know everything about it, I guess. And, they're appreciators of it. But yeah, they're like, okay. And there's a guy there who's like really drunk. And, he's drunk, and she's yelling at Tampopo, being mean. And, there's like some other guys in there, and they're just like being assholes. And Goro, I think he like stands up to her, right? He's like, hey, like, stop this. You're being an asshole. And they have a little fight, an off-screen fight, I believe.
Yes. Yeah, that fight seems fun. I mean, they don't really show anything. There's something, obviously, this film feels very Western, very inspired by the work of so many, Samuel Fuller and John Ford and just so many American filmmakers, but especially Westerns. And you think Guru, he has this cowboy hat that he wears.
Yeah.
And the first thing I thought of, which I know this predates that, but there's some cowboy bebop vibes to it. I think it's just the combination of like the Western and
the Japanese.
The Japanese. I think that's the only reason. But you kind of have this idea of like he's this cool. Guru's just like the coolest guy in the world, and he's just beating up these people. But they don't show it. They don't really show any fight scenes in the film. They just kind of like off screen it.
Yeah, he's like the Clint Eastwood tough guy, cool guy. Yeah, and he gets into a fight, and then he wakes up in the ramen shop. And he's beaten up, but he's being taken care of by Tampopo. Tampopo, by the way, is played by Nobuko Miyamoto, which is the director's wife.
I didn't know that.
And the little kid is their kid.
That's awesome.
Yeah, like Itami is. If you look at his filmography, she's in like all of his movies. Like she's like plays the lead in all of his movies, and for the most part, those are the movies that she's in. If you look at her filmography, that's the majority of the movies that she's in. And she's really good. She kind of is really good at like the sweet, like kind of like middle-aged women kind of thing. It's like a really, really good performance.
Yeah.
It's fun.
That's impressive. Good for her. The thing about acting is like, unless you're like a top tier level actor, I think pretty much, you watch those films of like Italian neorealists of like the 50s and 60s, and a lot of those are, non-actors or first-time actors. And honestly, I don't think most of the time you can tell the difference. I mean, obviously she is like a professional actor, but, not a large filmography. So it's not like she's done a ton of professional work, especially because I believe this is pretty early in his career. I think it's his second or third film.
Probably.
I think it's pretty early in his career.
Just because, it's like his third movie. His like second feature-length movie.
So then he didn't make a lot of films then if he died in 97. That means he was only a filmmaker for like 15 years, maybe 20.
Yeah, he made 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, like 8 features.
Wow.
From 1984 until he died in 97. So, yeah.
Too bad. All right.
But Tampopo is obviously his biggest movie, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely his most famous. It's his most well-known. And I guess I don't know. I haven't seen his other films, but it's good. Yeah,
it's really good. It's really good. And then from there, it's, basically, to make a long story short, Tampopo begs him because they're about to leave because they have to drop something off. So she's like, please, like, teach me how to make like really good ramen, because before that they kind of like do kind of like a little like workshop about like how to like, I don't know, be better at making ramen. And she's like, please, I need you. I want to like be like really, really great. Like, please just help me out in some way. And Goro's like, well, okay. I love the decision to do that, because it's like, there's not a lot of like build up to that moment where he decides to help her. Like, they don't like talk about it too much, which I like. It just happens. Like, this is the movie. This is what's going to happen now. He doesn't have much, I guess he doesn't have much to do or go to. So it just begins. So I really, really like that. It's just like, and then after that, you get kind of like this like Rocky like montage.
Yes, that's exactly what I thought of. She's like moving pots around and like, it's awesome. I love it.
Yeah, it's really, really good. It's of her like training to be better at ramen and stuff, and they're like exercising. It's like very, very funny. And then I think right after that, you get kind of like the first set of vignettes. They're like biking in a park and they're like talking. And then you have like there's a group of businessmen walking behind them. And it's great because they do this throughout the whole movie, where when they start the vignettes, the camera is on something else. Mm-hmm. And it kind of like slowly is like, okay, what's going on with here? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the things that I found interesting about this film, and the reason that I didn't really put it in a Monty Python sort of under that umbrella is simply because what I think the director here is so interested in is he's interested in the world of Tampopo and all the things in it. And unlike Monty Python, which is kind of just a series of skits that are kind of pushed together, and maybe you have a plot with like Life of Brian, there's kind of a plot, or like, Search for Holy Grail, there's sort of like a through line. But with this one, of course, while there are a ton of vignettes, they all kind of intervene with each other, right? They're all kind of like intertwined. And especially, right, with this first vignette, you pan over to this business group, and then you follow this business group into, and this moment kind of surprised me because you don't really know that it's going to be a series of vignettes before this. Like, you just think it's about them.
Yeah.
So it's kind of thrown off by it, but it works.
Yeah,
right?
it's good. Yeah.
and basically the first vignette is they're all ordering at this restaurant, and of course the first like 5 of them all order the exact same thing, and it's so slow and patient. Like, it's just
they all ordered the same thing that the boss orders.
Yeah. And it's just like he goes to every single person, and like, of course, like as it goes on, it gets a little bit faster, but just to be able to like go to every single person and to like wait for that punchline for that final person, is so
until you get to the final person, which is like a younger guy who's getting kicked around by the older guys, and he's like a food expert. Like, he orders all this stuff. Like, I guess one element or theme that kind of ties, or is at least kind of like common between the vignettes in the movie, is like, it's sort of, they all kind of discuss like manners or mores or pleasures, like, because the polite thing to do, the more like the polite thing to do for that guy would just be to order what everybody else ordered, but instead, he wants like the really nice wine or the really nice food. And that kind of goes into the next vignette, which is like a Japanese woman is teaching a group of other Japanese women how to like properly eat spaghetti, because like in Japan, it's common like when you're eating ramen to like make like slurping noises that shows that you're enjoying it. But like in the West or whatever, like, you're not supposed to make a lot of noise or whatever. But there's like a Western guy in the same restaurant, and he's making a lot of noise. So they're all like, well, I guess we'll make a lot of noise too. So they're all like eating spaghetti then, like really like loudly. It's like kind of talking about, I guess, breaking down these like kind of like made up manners and boxes and stuff, and kind of just sort of, as long as it's not hurting anyone, kind of like reveling and pleasure, and just kind of like doing it, you know what I mean? I think that's kind of the common thing between all the vignettes.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the idea that these, so-called mannerisms that have been built, especially, in Japanese culture during this time, which are very strict and kind of, I don't even say strict's the right word, but there's very particular things you do, just like in any culture. And, and this is what Luis Buñuel does in all his films, right? He's making fun of the absurdity of the bourgeoisie, of the rich. I mean, the rules of the game, you think of Jean Renoir, he's doing the exact same thing there too. It's the idea that these, this world that these mostly wealthy people have built, right? This high class people have built is just absolutely absurd and doesn't make any sense. And the easiest way to make fun of it is just kind of show how ridiculous it is. And that's exactly what he's doing in all of these vignettes, especially this one too. But I will say, as funny as this vignette is, and as much as I enjoy this vignette, one of my biggest pet peeves is the sound of people eating. Like, it bothers me so much. And that's so much of this movie, which is fine. And it works. It's just,
I mean, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to slurp it up.
But it's so irritating.
All right.
But I powered through for the sake of the film.
Okay, good.
For the sake of cinema.
It is a lot of slurping. It's a lot of noodles. It's a lot of slurping. I like the, of course, to get the next vignette to talk about briefly, of course, the food sex scene. I love the food sex scene. It's crazy.
Nice.
It's like we return to the people from the beginning of the movie, and they're like in a hotel room, and they're doing like these crazy sex food things where they're getting lemon juice and salt and like whipped cream in various places. It's an interesting, and they're getting like crabs involved. Well, not crabs, like some like lobster things.
Isn't it like a shrimp or something? It has like a bunch of legs.
And it's like tickling her. It's just,
I don't like that at all.
It's very unexpected, but I loved it. It's just like, once again, it's like another vignette about like it's unusual, I guess, to use food in that kind of way. But once again, two consenting parties. It's really kind of like a birth, sex, death kind of movie where you have like sex is kind of an element. It's not a big element of the movie, but it is like in some of these vignettes, and especially this one, of course, where they're like, at least this first one where they're using food in various ways. And it's very brief though. Like it sounds like it's like crazy and insane. It's a very short vignette.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say it's like, it doesn't feel in any way sort of like sexy simply for the sake of sexy. I wouldn't even really describe it as a sexy scene. It's a funny scene and it's like in good faith, and it seems like these people are in love, but it doesn't feel like, you know what I mean? It doesn't feel like we're preying on anyone's, sexuality in any way. It just feels lighthearted.
Yeah, it is. It's very lighthearted. Pretty much from here, you get basically like they are scoping out other ramen joints.
That's right. It's a series of going to different places and like trying to figure out. Well, the first time she goes to a place, she's like, "Oh, I'm just gonna like ask the guy for his recipe," and they're like, "They're not gonna tell you the recipe." She's like, "No. I'm just gonna ask." And she asks, like, "Hey, can I have the recipe?" He's like, "Why? Why would I give you the recipe? Like, you work like 3 doors down. I'm not gonna give you the recipe." She's like, "Well, I can pay you for the recipe," and she's like 50,000 yen, which I don't know if that's a lot or little. That's one of the things about watching old Japanese films or really old films that aren't honestly even old like American films. I don't know, like, is that a lot of money? Is it a little bit of money? Is it like some money? It's hard to tell.
It's a decent amount of money.
It's some amount of money.
It's some amount of money.
And she's like, "I'll give you 50,000 yen." And he's like, "I don't want 50,000 yen. I want 1,000,000 yen. Sounds like a lot, but I'll pay you back in like a year." She's like, 1,000,000 yen? That's a lot of yen. And this guy who's been eating at the restaurant is like, "Hey, I'll tell you the secret for 30,000. Don't give him 1,000,000 yen because I guess he bets on speedboats or something like that."
Gambler, yeah.
He's a gambler. So she's like, "Oh, okay." And then she comes back that night, and the scene's kind of like, it's probably one of like the eeriest, spooky. I mean, it's not that spooky, but there's some like eerie kind of spooky aspects to it because you don't really know who this guy is, and you're following him through like this close shop, which feels very claustrophobic. And then they go into like this dark room, and there's a moment that's like completely black, and you have no idea what's going on. You're like, "Oh, this feels." I understand why she's like a little bit frightened, which
yeah,
of course she would be.
She's so good. She's so good in the movie.
But there's like this little slit of light opens up, and I guess like his shop opens, or like there's a little slit, and she watches the guy make the ramen, and she learns his secret recipe for broth. I think.
Yeah, it's for the broth. Like in ramen, you have to like make the broth, and you have to have the right like toppings, and you have to like the noodles need to be made the right way. It's like all these like different elements that they're trying to like scope out and find out. And I think after that, you get this scene where like they're eating at one ramen restaurant and they don't finish it, and they're like, "Why didn't you finish it? What the heck?" They're like, "Yeah, it sucked." They're like, "Well, you know what? We're gonna go over to your restaurant and eat there and see what's up, huh?" And they're like, "Okay." And then it cuts to them like scrambling to like make the food. And then like they arrive and they're like, "All right, where's our food?" And then they start just like beating everybody up. Like they start beating everybody up. And then of course like Tampopo is like being held or choked or something. And then like Tampopo like wakes up. It's like the whole thing has been a dream. Mm-hmm. And she like, I remember, and then she like throws like the boiling pot everywhere. It's like, wow.
It's pretty dangerous. I mean, that looked like it was actually boiling water.
It looked like real boiling water. Yeah. That was so funny. That was pretty good. Yeah. And I think like after that they have the scene where they find the homeless guy, which is great.
Oh yeah, that's when they have to go meet the sensei.
That's a really fun whole sequence with the like the homeless people.
That's awesome. Well, what I love, so the scene basically is like Guru's like, "Hey, you know what you need the sensei. Like he's just like this master chef. Like he knows his shit."
Yeah.
And of course you're expecting, because if you've ever seen a film before, you expect like this master chef who's, spent thousands and thousands of hours inside a ramen shop, and has all these like fancy equipment. But instead, they basically meet a group of homeless people.
Yeah.
Because the sensei, he used to be an OBGYN, but his shop was stolen by his wife or something like that.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter. And it's just like this collection of homeless people who are absurdly like well read on just like the world of ramen and cooking, and like they steal from like these fancy shops and they just have like the most experienced. It's just so funny and weird, and just to have this juxtaposition of like these homeless looking dirty men having like these really highfalutin conversations. And of course it kind of goes back, right? It's the inverse of what was happening earlier when you have these really wealthy people kind of doing like these really silly things. It's kind of the inverse of that.
They don't even know anything about food. They're just at a fancy restaurant because they
have money. No respect for the art form.
No, exactly. No respect. But the whole scene is like really funny, and they're like, Sensei, let's go do the fucking thing. He like for some reason is cleaned up all of a sudden. I like before they leave, he's like not like, because he's like dirty and he's covered in rags, and right before they leave he's all dressed up and like clean again. We'll see you off, Sensei, we'll sing you a song. That felt very Monty Python to me.
Yes.
Where they just suddenly like they all like start singing a beautiful song like out of nowhere.
Or like Mel Brooks, right? Doesn't have kind of a Mel Brooks feel to it too?
I'm thinking of Mel Brooks as well, where they like all just like suddenly, and they're all, and they sing the whole song all the way through, and they're all, and the characters are like standing there like watching them like it's like kind of like a normal thing. and it's like not, it's the whole movie, like we talked about, very lighthearted, doesn't really make fun of anyone. Very good.
Yeah. And in between those two scenes, one of the homeless people takes the boy, like they break into like a kitchen, and that whole scene feels very Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton-esque. It's like very kind of silent filmmaking comedy kind of thing, very physical comedy, and they're running around and making things. So I love how he makes like this perfect meal, and it's all like right before this security guard is like walking.
Right. You're right. That is very Charlie Chaplin. You get another food sex scene after this where they get an egg yolk, and several times, this is crazy. That's crazy that they did that. Apparently, like they tested several egg yolks to see which one would break. Like which would be harder to break. It's like they're like putting egg yolks in their mouth, and like the Yakuza couple are like going back and forth, like going back, putting the egg yolk back and forth into each other's mouth. It's really great. And she like, it bursts and like it gets everywhere. Oh, it's so good. It's so crazy. Oh man. Yeah, the one too where like the guy is on the train. That's another like really quick one where he's like on a train and like he has like a really bad toothache.
Yeah.
That one's cute. He's hurting, but then this girl comes with a bunch of food that he wants, and he's like, okay, I'm gonna eat. He's like,
it doesn't matter.
Yeah, he's like, I don't care, I just want to like eat. And but then he like goes to a dentist, and they like crack open his tooth, and I guess it smells disgusting. That one's like, once again another vignette about, and then he meets a little boy later. He's like eating ice cream, and he's got like a carrot on his neck.
Yeah, he can only have like organic, non-processed food.
And he gives him the ice cream cone. Once again, it's like like I said, letting go, kind of just experiencing the pleasures of everyday life and of like things like food and like sex, still being responsible, not hurting anyone, of course, not doing anything like super crazy, but just kind of, having the ice cream cone or, that kind of thing. And I like it. It's fun. Right after this, you get the scene where they meet the guy and he's eating and he almost dies.
Oh, that's right. They're eating at like a restaurant, and they're eating ramen.
Yeah.
And there's like this wealthy lady and what I assume is like her father or something like that. And they walk him into like the back of the restaurant. They're like, okay, you can't have like the beef ramen or like these other things. Like you can't get these things. And he's like, okay. The daughter, whoever, goes away. She leaves with the chauffeur.
He's like, I have to go to the bank.
Yeah, let's go to the bank. So she goes to the bank, and of course, immediately after she leaves, that's literally exactly what he orders. And then he almost dies from it. He chokes on it, and that whole choking scene is just so ridiculous. Because like he's choking on it, and of course, Guru and them are all next, and they're like freaking out, and they're like, "What do we do?" And they're like patting him on the back, and then they like try to flip him over, and then they get a vacuum.
Yeah,
like, I think it's a vacuum, and they just stick it into his mouth and just suck out whatever he was choking on.
Yeah, I like that scene a lot. Once again, like that felt very Western-y. There was something kind of like, it just feels like a bunch of Western comedy influences going on there. It felt like something out of like instead of at a ramen restaurant, it would be like at a, I don't know, like at a burger restaurant or something like that. He's like all, oh, thank you so much for helping me. You know, let's have some food. That really like crazy moment where they kill a turtle because they're like, well, let's have some soft shell turtle. They kill a turtle.
Yeah, they murder a turtle right on screen. That was pretty intense.
That's the second time I've seen someone kill a whole turtle in a movie.
What was the first time?
Cannibal Holocaust. In that movie, they kill a giant turtle, and you watch, and then you see it on screen, like it's a giant tortoise thing, and they fish it from the river and they kill it, like on screen. It's not a very good-hearted movie. Like this movie's very lighthearted, and when they kill a turtle, it's like, whoa, that's crazy. It's like a little turtle. It's very quick. In Cannibal Holocaust, it's like they like destroy it. Like it's horrible. I don't think that movie very much.
Yeah, probably not. I won't watch it anytime soon.
It's interesting, but not a great movie. Anyway, I think through the old guy that they saved, they meet kind of like his like chef or assistant who's like who knows a thing or two about food, and he just has to help them out.
I think he's the chauffeur.
Oh, okay. But for some reason, he knows a lot about food, so he's helping them out.
Well, it's like everyone, right? That's one of the things that I love about this film. Is like all the people that are like have all these like secret recipes and stuff. They're not like professional chefs. They're not people who make this, which I think is kind of the point, right? Because how they say like ramen's for normal people, right? It's made normally for normal people. And so all of the people that kind of help her out are all people who aren't chefs. Like this isn't like their profession. Like one sensei was an OBGYN, and this one's Guru's obviously not. He's a truck driver, and the one who made the noodles, he's a chauffeur.
Tampopo kind of says that line in during the dream when she's talking to the guys at the ramen shop. They're like arguing and stuff, and I think like she says something like, I think the guy calls her like an amateur, and she said like, you know, all people who like ramen or who are appreciated are amateurs. So they're all like, all right, it's go time. We got the team. We got the crazy team going on. The new guy, the chauffeur guy, and Tampopo, they go to a ramen shop to kind of like get like a good noodle recipe, and she's able to like trick the chef there, which is funny. Where she's like, oh, you know, these noodles, they're lacking something. And he's like, oh no, they're great. Like we make them the same every time. It's like, well, maybe you missed a knead. I was like, no, I always knead it 3 times. Well, maybe you didn't let it sit overnight. No, we let it like, he like accidentally gives the whole recipe to her.
It was a really creative, inventive, and fun moment. It's a good way to kind of spill the beans without like super, you know what? It reminds me of probably only because I saw this yesterday. I saw the Red Notice yesterday, that movie with Ryan Reynolds, Dwayne The Rock Johnson, and Gal Gadot, which is bad. I mean, it's not bad. It's just not.
You're going to be the only person in the world that's going to make a distinction between Tampopo and Red Notice.
Here's the reason I bring it up.
Okay.
It's because it's a spy movie, but like there's so much exposition and like every single thing, right? They have to like explain to you over and over, and it's like this whole thing, and everything has to be super complicated.
Because people are stupid.
Yes. But like in Tampopo, it's just like, hey, I'm just gonna like basically just like trick him into telling me the recipe. It's much simpler, but
Yeah.
basically the same movie.
Basically the same. Yeah, I would definitely. Then you get one of my you get one of my other favorite scenes too. It's just one fun scene after another where they get into a fight.
Oh, that scene is beautiful. That is like
very Western.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I don't know if this movie, I wouldn't consider it like necessarily a beautiful film. I mean, there's definitely like moments, but it's certainly not, genre noir or Ingmar Bergman. Like, it's not like, I wouldn't say visuals are like its top priority, but the whole fight scene, which a lot of it takes place basically like under an underpass or something, and they're like silhouetted. It's just a very beautiful looking scene.
I like it. It's a good fight. They beat each other up, and they're both like lying there, and they're like just talking, like very Westerny. Like the enemies at the beginning of the movie decide to team up. Like they both see something in common, and the guy decides, like, you know what, I'm going to help you guys. I'm going to for pay. I'm going to update Tampopo's ramen restaurant. I'm going to make it, because he's like an interior decorator or something like that.
Like a contractor, yeah.
He's like a contractor. So yeah, once again, we have another member of the team ready to go. That's just funny. I just love like that kind of like spin where it's like the antagonist at the beginning of the movie is now, another friend, there's not really any like antagonists in the movie.
Yeah.
Oh, and I think after that too, so they're like trying to update the restaurant. I think also they like give like Tampopo a makeover too, like they like, change her hair or give her makeup or whatever. And she's like feeling good, and she's like, hey, let's go out to dinner. And she and Goro, they go to like they have like dinner like at a Korean barbecue restaurant with the grill and stuff. The way that film was shot, like showing them having dinner in the restaurant with the windows like right next to them in the back, like the windows right next to them, and it kind of like goes out far. That reminded me of like in Thief, the Michael Mann movie Thief, where James Caan is the love interest in the movie. I don't know why I thought of that movie when I saw that part. It just really reminded me of it. Probably Thief is like a neo-noir, and there's neo-noir aspects in Tampopo.
Yeah. Similar enough.
It's just like they're getting to know each other. They're kind of falling in love. And, they go home and it's like they're like soaked from like walking in the rain. I like in Goro, like he's taking a bath, he's still wearing like his cowboy hat.
Always has the cowboy hat. I love it.
Cowboy hat on. They're just like kind of like connecting with each other. And then I think you get the next set of vignettes, which starts with the old lady going in the supermarket.
That is my favorite vignette. It's my favorite vignette.
Really? That one's good. That one's fun.
It's like the shop owner, and he owns like this grocery store, and he's just sitting there doing his thing, and this old lady waddles in, and she goes up to this peach, and she just like starts to squeeze it, like she's just squeezing this peach.
Mm-hmm.
And he like puts his newspaper down, and he looks over, and of course she's like shuffled away onto something else, and he's like looking at the peach. He's like, this peach has definitely been squeezed.
Yeah.
And she's over squeezing cheese or something. She's like squeezing more things, and it becomes like this chase scene where he's chasing this old lady, and she's just going around squeezing things for some reason. I don't know why. There's no reason for it. She just loves to squeeze things.
Once again, she just wants to do it. You probably shouldn't do that when you go to a supermarket, but she likes it.
Good for her, I guess.
Yeah, that one's good. That one has no dialogue.
Mm-mm.
Just like a really good kind of little vignette where they run around, kind of sort of slapstick thing. Like you said, they kind of thread together where the guy goes to dinner and he's eating dinner and he looks across and he meets eyes with like a guy, and then right away it just switches to the other vignette, which is like an old man. He's eating with this guy. He's like, oh, professor, like I'm glad you're investing in whatever we're doing. And he goes on the phone call. He's like, yeah, he's a sucker. We got the professor. He's going to give us a bunch of money. And the guy's like eating, and then he gets like arrested. And the guy's like, oh, you're doing the professor thing, huh? And he's like, and of course, you know, he's like, well, can I please just have one more like piece of food before you arrest me?
Mm-hmm.
Very food centric. In Japan, I know the food there is very good. You know, I've never been there, but I know that like, you know, that's one of the things that you participate in if you do visit Japan is all the crazy food that they have, all the great food that they have. So I believe him when he says like, please, I just need one more like morsel of food before you arrest me.
The man comes home, which I think he was at that restaurant. He comes home and his wife is dying. He's like, oh shit, not cool. And he's like, please don't die, please don't die, please don't die. And she gets up and she cooks this meal for them. Like, you know, she's clearly very disheveled and sickly. And she cooks this meal for them and they're all eating. And then she dies. Just right there while they're eating.
This is your mother's last meal. Eat it while it's hot. They're like all crying and stuff, and they're like eating this rice. I like it too because like the mom, she does seem to be somewhat blissful when she serves them the meal. You know what I mean? She like, even though she's sick, she almost has like a moment of bliss. It's kind of nice. It's a very touching moment because she's like right before she dies, she kind of has that moment of bliss where her family is like enjoying the food she made. Mm-hmm. It's very nice.
Nice.
We continue on. You got the team, they're trying her food and they're like, you know what? There's something missing. It's almost there. You know, they try a couple different things. I think like the interior decorator gives her like a recipe to try out. And, you know, I think you might get a montage, right? Where like they're doing a bunch of different things to try to like perfect her food. And you get that scene where like her kid is like beating up the bullies. Yeah. That's pretty fun. I like that. He like beats them up. You know, she's like, okay, let's do it again. And she has them all come back a second time to try her food.
And this time when they try the food, which so one of the things that they make clear very early on in the film is that they are offended if you don't finish the ramen.
Yeah.
So you eat the ramen, you like eat all the noodles, and then like you slurp it up to the last drop. And if you don't do that,
something's wrong.
Shit, your ramen's no good. The first time when they tried it, they didn't finish it. Mm-hmm. She was heartbroken. This time when they try it, I like how when they drink it up, like it's like one after the other, and then like when they go down like one at a time. It's very insane. It's very satisfying, like visually. It's just like the pattern's nice. It's like
about as satisfying as that ramen.
It reminds me of that scene in Playtime where those businessmen are getting into the car. You know what I mean? And there's like the other. It has like that kind of similar pattern to it.
Even like Tati is like maybe like another movie, even another director you might kind of point out as an influence. There's a lot of stuff in the movie. And they're like, you got it. It's perfect. You got it. You made the ramen. It's perfect. You know, like you said, they all drink it up. And then you get the scene right after that where they're updating the building now. They're getting ready to reopen. And you get the scene, of course, where the Yakuza guy, he gets shot. And he's like, you don't see who like, it doesn't matter. Like, he got shot. And he's like, oh, that reminded me of Breathless. Like at the end when he gets shot, right? Like, and he's like, it's like a 20-second shot where he like gets shot and he's like walking down the street, like, because he's like about to like fall because he got shot, and he like falls down, and you know, he's like, oh, I got shot, and he's like, his white suit is like all red now, and his lover goes up to him and he's like, oh my God, you're dead. What are we going to do? And he tells us like very specific anecdote about how they should have like gone boar hunting. When you go boar hunting in the specific region, they eat yams. And then when you cut out their like intestines, you can have like yam sausages. And like, that's his like dying breath. Is to let her know like we could have done that together. You know, it's like very specific, but it's perfect. It's like the end of like a gangster movie.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I hope that when I die, I have a very specific story that I can tell, like a very specific like want. So then that way,
Yeah, just like, oh, I wish we would have done this with a specific team. It's perfect though. I wouldn't have it any other way.
yeah, absolutely. And it's, I mean, as silly as it is a little. It's touching, right? So it's a little sad when you see him die. Like you feel for him.
I like them.
Yeah.
Yeah. But luckily, you get a nice ending where she's got the chef hat and the place looks immaculate. The ramen shop looks great. Everyone's happy. They're like, wow, you did it. You get a great shot where they're all like hanging out in there and people start like filing in and ordering food. And, everyone's like, wow, you did it. I can't believe it. And yeah, it's just like a really good like ending. And Goro, even though it's kind of like a bittersweet ending because Goro, he does the Western like, all right, well, my job is done, like kind of thing where he's like, now it's time to lead up, like drive off into the sunsets. And, I'm going to miss Tampopo, but, I'm done here. He like lights a cigarette too, right? Like he'd leave. Like that's such a Western thing. Once again, the hat lights a cigarette. It's time to leave.
And then he drives away. Him and Gunn drive away.
They drive away, yeah.
And that ending, I mean, not that part of the ending. That part of the ending's very like Clint Eastwood, kind of like, mid 60s, 70s, kind of like tipping his hat. But like the part where they're driving away, I think it's probably just the music. Although the colors are very, even though this movie came out in 1985, the palette looks very similar to something that comes out in like the early 60s or 70s. Like it has like this pastel kind of technicolor look to it.
Yeah.
And that ending with like the blue truck driving away and with the music is very, and we talked about this before, but it has like, it feels very Playtime-esque in kind of the ending. I don't know why I thought of that, but I thought of.
Yeah. And then of course you get like the last part, which is like the credits scene where it's just a slow zoom on a baby breastfeeding.
Yep.
It's great. It's like, it's kind of, like I said, it's really kind of like a life, sex, death movie, right? That's like, like the end is the beginning kind of thing. So it's like, you make sense where at the end, it's like, it's the first meal, the ending is the beginning, so once again, another unexpected thing that I did not expect to see is just a baby being breastfed by a real person. It's like, whoa, okay, well, that's fine. And that's the end of the movie.
Sure is. So Andrew, final thoughts and rating?
Really good. Yeah, I like the movie a lot. Very feel good. When I say feel good, I hope people don't like take it the wrong way. Like it still has like plenty of like peaks and valleys, you know what I mean? Like it has its sad moments, it has its like kind of like, scarier moments, but it's generally feel good. Of course, like we talked about, very Western inspired, very inspired by like comedies and Westerns and even European movies. Like you said, looks very good. Sounds good. Really, really good food movie. I mean, everything looked really delicious in the movie. It was just like one of those movies where, you probably should like eat before or during, otherwise you're probably like gonna get pretty hungry, because just everything like looks immaculate. And yeah, it's just like very funny, very engaging. The vignettes things is a little like off-putting at first because you're just like, what's going on? But once you get into it, you're like, okay, this all this like really does come together. And yeah, I was just very impressed by it. And it's definitely another movie it's definitely something I'm going to be watching again. Yeah, I'll probably give it, an 8 out of 10.
Yeah, I feel that. Inspired by Tampopo, I'm actually making ramen tonight.
Let's go. So, I love ramen.
But as far as Tampopo goes, inspired my ramen making.
That's good.
I really enjoyed Tampopo. I enjoyed pretty much everything about it. It is a very feel-good, just like a fun film. In the way like Jacques Tati's films, I think that's probably one of the reasons why we keep referring to Jacques Tati, is because it just feels like very lighthearted and it's not very cynical about anything. Like it's making fun of the world without like being dark about it. Like it doesn't feel cruel to anyone. It just feels like fun and lighthearted and a good time. I loved pretty much all the vignettes. I think the only complaint I have is I think some of the vignettes are better than other ones. So it's just kind of like, for me, it was sort of hit or miss, but I thought they were all funny overall. I think the only one I enjoyed all of them. I think my least favorite one though is that sex one with the shrimp thing, just because like
That was the best one.
Just I don't like the shrimp thing. It just freaks me out. I don't know. I don't like it. I don't like the shrimp thing. It was weird. Not a fan.
Okay.
But enjoyable film, very funny, very good time. I'm very excited to watch more of his films because this is clearly someone who knows what the hell they're doing. So I am also going to give this film an 8 out of 10.
Let's go.
All right, y'all. Thank you for listening. You can find me at Austinlugo12.
You can find me at Twitter at adharp24, and you can also find me on Letterboxd as well.
You can find this podcast wherever you hear our podcasts. You can also find us on YouTube and Instagram at With Nothing to Say Podcasts. And a shout out to our incredible editor, Shannon. She's one of the best and always has been, always will be. And thank you all for listening.
Thank you.